The city was alive with its usual heartbeat, cars rushing past, neon signs flickering even in daylight, and the constant hum of people hurrying to places that often mattered little in the grand design of life. But in one forgotten corner of this sprawling metropolis, where the cracks in the pavement told stories of neglect, a young black boy named Malik stood frozen. He couldn't have been more than 12 years old. His shoes were worn thin, laces frayed, and his shirt carried the stains of both play and struggle. Yet it wasn't his clothes that told his story. It was his eyes. Eyes that had seen too much for their age, eyes that carried the weight of being invisible in a world that was too busy to notice. And then he saw her. At first, Malik thought the woman lying on the cold sidewalk was simply resting, maybe a passerby too tired to carry on. But the stillness of her chest, the unnatural angle of her arm, and the pale look on her face told him otherwise. She wasn't resting. She was unconscious. Malik's small hand shook as he crouched beside her. "Miss? Miss, can you hear me?" His voice trembled, but there was urgency in it. She didn't respond. Her purse had fallen open beside her, and Malik's curious eyes caught the edge of an ID card, a name printed in elegant letters. Charlotte Harlow. Malik's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know her personally, but the name Harlow wasn't unfamiliar. Everyone in the city knew the Harlows, billionaires who lived in towering glass mansions far away from the cracked sidewalks Malik walked every day. But none of that mattered now. Rich or poor, billionaire or beggar, here lay a young woman whose breath was fading. Malik's instinct was clear. He couldn't leave her there. He couldn't walk away. But what could a boy like him do? The world had taught him he was powerless, invisible, a shadow on the street. Still, something stronger than fear rose inside him. Dignity. He searched her purse, not for money but for a phone. To his shock, he found one. Sleek, polished, glowing with power he rarely touched. He hesitated. Should he even be holding something like this? If someone saw him, would they think he was stealing? Would they accuse him, judge him, and brand him a thief because of the color of his skin? The thought chilled him, but he pushed it aside. A life was at stake. With trembling fingers, Malik pressed the screen. The phone unlocked with a simple swipe, her emergency contacts visible. The first name on the list, Father. Malik pressed it. The line rang once, twice, and then a voice came through, deep, commanding, filled with irritation that someone had dared to disturb him. "Who is this?" "Charlotte, why are you calling me in the middle of—" "So." Malik's voice cracked. Please listen. I found your daughter. She's lying on the street. She's not waking up." There was a pause on the other end. The billionaire's voice hardened. "What kind of prank is this?" Malik's chest tightened. He had expected disbelief, but the sting of it still hurt. "No, sir. I swear I'm not lying. She's here, on 5th and Monroe. She's not moving. Please. She needs help." The billionaire's tone grew sharp, almost angry. "Who are you? How did you get this number? If you've touched my daughter—" Tears welled in Malik's eyes, but he refused to hang up. "I didn't touch her. I just found her. I'm trying to help. Please, sir, you have to believe me." For a moment, there was only silence. On the other end of the line, Richard Harlow, billionaire tycoon, owner of half the city's skyline, wrestled with disbelief. He had built his empire on suspicion, on never trusting a soul, and now a child's voice claimed his daughter was lying helpless. Could he believe this boy? Malik's voice broke through again, soft but resolute. "She's not breathing right. I don't care if you trust me. Just send someone. Please." Something in the boy's tone pierced through Richard's walls of arrogance. It wasn't the polished words of manipulation he heard every day from businessmen. It was raw, honest, a boy too young to lie this well. "I'll send an ambulance," Richard muttered. "Stay with her." The line went dead. Malik exhaled shakily, staring at the phone in his small hands. He wanted to run, to disappear before anyone saw him with it. But when he looked back at Charlotte, her stillness anchored him. No, he couldn't leave. Not until she was safe. Minutes passed like hours. Malik knelt beside her, whispering encouragement even though she couldn't hear. "Hold on, miss. They're coming. Just hold on." The ambulance siren wailed in the distance, growing louder. Relief washed over him, but fear too. What would they think when they saw him here, a poor black boy hovering over the unconscious daughter of the richest man in the city? Would they believe his story? Or would they assume the worst, as they always did? The ambulance screeched to a stop. Paramedics rushed out, eyes darting between Charlotte and Malik. "What happened here?" one demanded. I found her," Malik stammered. "She was already like this. I called her dad." The paramedics exchanged skeptical looks, but moved quickly, lifting Charlotte onto a stretcher. Malik stepped back, his heart pounding. He wanted to vanish, but something rooted him to the spot. He had done the right thing. That had to count for something. As the paramedics loaded her into the ambulance, one turned back to Malik. "Kid, are you coming with us?" Malik blinked, surprised. "Me?" "Yeah." "She was alone, and you're the only witness. We might need you." He hesitated, fear tugging at him, but then he nodded. If Charlotte woke, someone had to tell her she wasn't alone. Someone had to tell her a boy she didn't know cared enough to stay. The ambulance door slammed shut, and Malik found himself inside, sitting beside the unconscious billionaire's daughter as the city blurred past windows. He clutched his notebook in his pocket, his heart racing with both fear and courage. And far away, in a glass tower that touched the clouds, Richard Harlow stared at his phone. The boy's trembling voice echoed in his mind. He had trusted no one for decades. Yet tonight, his daughter's life rested on the word of a child he had never met. The hospital doors burst open as the ambulance rolled in, the stretcher wheeled swiftly by the paramedics. Charlotte lay pale and unconscious, wires already connected to her fragile frame. Malik sat huddled on a bench outside the emergency wing, knees pressed to his chest, his small fingers tapping nervously against his notebook. Every sound, the squeak of nurses' shoes, the loudspeaker calling for doctors, the hiss of oxygen tanks, pressed against him. He didn't belong here. He knew it. He was just a boy from the part of town where hospitals were a luxury no one could afford. Yet here he was, pulled into the world of billionaires, where every surface gleamed and every corner smelt of antiseptic wealth. Then came the footsteps, heavy, authoritative, echoing with impatience. Malik looked up, and there he was, Richard Harlow. He was taller than Malik expected, with broad shoulders and a sharp suit that seemed to carry its own shadow. His silver hair was neatly combed, his polished shoes striking the tile floor like thunder. The weight of power followed him into the room. Every nurse stepped aside, every doctor lowered their eyes. And then his gaze fell on Malik. "You." The word was spat out like venom. "You're the one who called me." Malik swallowed hard, his throat dry. He wanted to shrink back into the chair, to disappear, but he forced himself to nod. "Yes, sir. I found her." Richard's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, his expensive cologne filling the boy's senses. "Do you expect me to believe that? My daughter, my Charlotte, just happened to collapse on the street, and a boy like you conveniently finds her." The words cut deep, not just for what they said, but for what they implied. A boy like you. Malik had heard it before, though in softer tones, muttered under breaths, or whispered when they thought he couldn't hear. It was never just about him being a boy. It was about the color of his skin, about the invisibility of his existence until something went wrong. "I didn't hurt her," Malik said, his voice trembling but steady. "She was already like that when I saw her. I called you. That's all." Richard's jaw tightened. He turned to the doctors, his voice rising. "I want security here. Now, until we know what happened, I don't want this boy anywhere near her." Two guards appeared almost instantly, their uniforms stiff, their eyes cold. Malik's heart pounded as they approached. He could feel the weight of injustice pressing against him, the fear that everything he had done, every ounce of courage it took to call for help, would be twisted against him. "I'm telling the truth," Malik said quickly, his voice breaking. "I didn't do anything. Please, sir, I just wanted to help." Richard glared at him, torn between disbelief and the echo of the boy's voice from the phone call. There had been something raw, something unpolished in that plea, something that didn't sound like a lie. One of the doctors stepped forward, a woman with sharp eyes but a softer tone. "Mr. Harlow, with all due respect, the boy's account matches what we found." Charlotte collapsed due to a sudden fainting episode, possibly linked to stress or medical condition. There are no signs of assault. Richard turned sharply toward her. And you expect me to just take his word? A stranger's? The doctor held his gaze. Sometimes truth comes from unexpected places. Richard didn't answer, but his silence was enough for the guards to pause. Malik sat frozen, his small hands gripping the edge of the chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. Minutes stretched into hours. Charlotte remained in the emergency wing, surrounded by doctors and machines that beeped with sterile indifference. Malik wanted to leave, to slip away before anyone decided to throw him out. But something inside told him to stay. He had promised her, even though she hadn't heard him, that she wouldn't be alone. As the hours dragged on, Richard stood at the glass window, his posture unyielding but his eyes betraying the storm inside. Billionaires weren't supposed to feel powerless, but tonight he did. His empire meant nothing in the face of his daughter's fragility. And somewhere in the corner of his mind, the image of a small boy kneeling on the sidewalk beside her replayed over and over. Finally, the door opened. A senior physician stepped out, exhaustion etched across his face. "She's stable," he said, "but she needs rest, observation, and perhaps more tests. We'll keep her overnight." Relief washed over Richard like a tide, but it quickly hardened into control. "I want the best specialist flown in. Money is no object. Do you understand?" The doctor nodded, but before leaving, his gaze flicked briefly toward Malik. "By the way, Mr. Harlow, your daughter is alive because someone stayed with her until we arrived. That boy kept her breathing, kept her safe. You might want to remember that." Richard's eyes followed the doctor's words toward Malik, who sat quietly, almost blending into the background. The boy didn't look like a hero. His shoes were worn, his shirt wrinkled, and his face weary. But there was something in his eyes, a quiet courage that unsettled Richard. He walked over, slow, deliberate steps echoing in the corridor. Malik looked up, bracing himself for more suspicion. Instead, Richard stopped just short of him, his voice low but edged. "Why?" he asked. Malik blinked. "Why? What? Why didn't you just walk away? Most people would have, especially someone like you." The boy hesitated, unsure whether to be offended or simply honest. "Because she needed help, and I was there. It didn't matter who she was. It just mattered that she was human." For the first time, Richard's mask faltered. He didn't reply, but the silence between them said more than words. As the night wore on, Malik dozed in the corner, too tired to fight sleep. Richard remained standing by the window of his daughter's room, glancing back occasionally at the small figure curled on the chair. Doubt still lingered in his mind, but beneath it stared something else, something unfamiliar. Respect. And somewhere deep down, Richard Harlow realized that his daughter's life had been touched not by his wealth, not by his power, not by his empire of influence, but by the simple courage of a boy the world tried so hard not to see. The quiet hum of machines filled the hospital room. The glow of the monitors pulsed faintly in the dim daylight that spilt through the wide windows. Charlotte lay motionless, her chest rising and falling in rhythm with the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Malik sat in a chair near the door, his small legs tucked beneath him, his notebook resting on his lap. He wasn't writing, just holding it, as if the worn pages gave him strength. Every now and then he glanced at Richard Harlow, who stood near the bed like a sentry guarding a kingdom that was suddenly too fragile. The silence between them was sharp, almost unbearable. Richard hadn't asked Malik to leave, but he hadn't asked him to stay either. The boy was simply there, an unwanted shadow, tolerated only because the doctors had insisted his presence had mattered. Then a soft groan broke the stillness. Richard's head snapped toward the bed. Charlotte's fingers twitched, her lips parted, and her eyes fluttered open, hazy with confusion. "Charlotte!" Richard whispered, his stern exterior cracking into relief. He rushed to her side, grasping her hand. "Sweetheart, you're safe. You're in the hospital." Her eyes darted around, trying to piece together the fragments of memory. I was walking. Then everything went dark." "You collapsed," Richard said firmly. "But you're all right now. You'll be fine." Charlotte blinked again, her gaze shifting slowly across the room, until it landed on Malik. The boy froze under her stare, uncertain whether to look away or hold his ground. His heart pounded, afraid she might not remember what happened, or worse, that she might accuse him. But instead, her lips trembled into a faint smile. "You," she whispered weakly. "You were there." Richard's brow furrowed. "You know him." Charlotte nodded, her voice fragile but sure. "When I fell, I thought I was alone. But I remember, I heard someone. A boy. He kept calling me, telling me to hold on." Her gaze softened toward Malik. "That was you, wasn't it?" Malik's throat tightened. He nodded slowly. "Yes. I didn't want you to be alone." Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes. She squeezed her father's hand. "Dad, he saved me. If he hadn't called you, if he hadn't stayed." Richard stiffened, caught between pride for his daughter's survival and the sting of her gratitude directed at a boy he didn't trust. "Charlotte, you don't know that. The doctors—" "No, Dad." Her voice was firmer now, carrying the weight of truth. "I do know. I felt his voice before I felt anything else. He didn't leave me. He gave me a chance to be here right now." The room fell silent again, but this time Richard couldn't hide the conflict brewing inside him. His daughter's fragile but certain testimony clashed with every suspicion he'd thrown at Malik. Malik shifted nervously in his chair, clutching his notebook. He didn't want praise and didn't want to be anyone's hero. He only wanted the truth to matter. "I'm glad you're okay," he said softly, almost afraid of speaking too loudly. "That's all I wanted." Charlotte gave him a weak but genuine smile, a silent acknowledgment of dignity that Richard had refused to offer. The doctors entered soon after, checking her vitals, adjusting the machines, and confirming that she would recover with rest. Richard busied himself with questions, his commanding tone returning as he demanded tests, specialists, and guarantees. But Charlotte's gaze drifted back to Malik again and again, as if tethered by an invisible thread of gratitude. Later, when the doctors left and the room grew quiet again, Richard finally turned to the boy. His voice was low, almost grudging. "You stayed." Malik looked up, startled by the acknowledgement. "I promise." "Most wouldn't have," Richard admitted, though his tone carried no warmth, especially when the world would have suspected them first. Malik didn't flinch. "I know. That's why I had to." Richard studied him for a long moment, as though trying to unravel the mystery of a child who carried so much courage in such a small frame. He wanted to dismiss it as luck, coincidence, or even manipulation. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. The boy had chosen to stay when no one else would. As night fell again, Charlotte drifted back into sleep, her breathing steady. Malik remained by the door, unwilling to leave even though his body begged for rest. Richard, too, stayed by her side, his eyes occasionally flicking toward the boy. For the first time in years, Richard Harlow felt something he didn't recognize. It wasn't trust, not yet. It wasn't gratitude, not fully. It was the unsettling awareness that his world, built on wealth, suspicion, and control, had been cracked open by the simple dignity of a child who had nothing. And though he would never admit it aloud, Richard knew that he could no longer dismiss Malik as just a boy from the streets. Because tonight, the life of his daughter, his only daughter, had been safeguarded by the courage of someone the world insisted on overlooking. The hospital room was quiet, but not with the heavy silence of fear. It was a softer quiet, like the kind that followed a storm. Charlotte slept peacefully, her breathing steady, her color returning. The machines no longer felt like threats, but guardians keeping her safe. Malik sat slouched in the chair near the door, exhaustion pulling at his eyelids. He had been there for hours, maybe days. Time had blurred in the brightness of hospital lights. His small notebook rested against his chest, its edges bent from being held too tightly. Richard stood by the window, staring into the city that sprawled beneath the hospital. The skyline glittered with towers he partly owned, streets paved with his money, and businesses that rose and fell with his influence. Yet none of that power could have prevented the moment his daughter collapsed on the street. None of it could have kept her alive long enough for the doctors to intervene. And the man who had, he wasn't a man at all. He was a boy with nothing but courage. Richard's thoughts twisted like smoke. He wanted to be grateful, But gratitude felt like surrender, a lowering of walls he had built for decades. He wanted to see Malik as ordinary and replaceable. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw the boy kneeling on the sidewalk, his small hand steady against the chaos of the world. The door creaked open. A nurse entered, checking Charlotte's vitals. She smiled at Malik. "You've been here all night, haven't you?" Malik nodded shyly. The nurse's smile widened. "You did a brave thing. Child, don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Richard's jaw tightened at the words. It wasn't that he disagreed, not entirely, but it unsettled him to watch strangers honor a boy who had come from the shadows of a world he had never bothered to see. Later that afternoon, Charlotte stirred awake again. Her eyes fluttered open, clearer this time. She saw Malik first and whispered, "You're still here?" Malik gave a small smile. "I said I wouldn't leave." She reached out a weak hand toward him. "Thank you. For everything." He hesitated, then gently shook her hand, careful not to disturb the wires around her wrist. "I just did what anyone should have done." Richard finally stepped forward, his deep voice cutting into the fragile moment. "Not anyone would have." Both Malik and Charlotte looked at him. Richard stood straighter, his hands clasped behind his back as though he were delivering a business decree. But his words carried a weight he wasn't used to showing. "I owe you something," he said, his eyes locked on Malik, "for what you did for my daughter. Money, education, a future, whatever it is, you will have it." Malik blinked, stunned. Then his expression hardened with a quiet dignity beyond his years. "I didn't do it for money." Richard frowned. "Everyone has a price." "Not me," Malik said softly, but firmly. "I just didn't want her to be alone. That's all." The words hit Richard harder than he expected. For a man who measured life in contracts and numbers, the simplicity of Malik's answer was almost unbearable. Charlotte spoke up, her voice gentle but insistent. "Dad, maybe sometimes things aren't about what people can buy or sell. Maybe it's about what they choose to give." Richard's lips tightened, but he didn't argue. That evening, news of Charlotte's collapse had already spread beyond the hospital walls. The billionaire's daughter, saved not by her father's wealth but by the actions of a boy from the other side of the city, whispers carried the story into the streets, into neighborhoods Malik knew well. Some celebrated the boy's courage, others doubted it, and many simply ignored it, as they ignored so much about lives like his. When reporters arrived at the hospital gates, Richard shielded Charlotte from their questions. But Malik, slipping out into the corridor for some air, found himself surrounded. "Are you the boy who saved her? What were you doing there? Did you know she was a billionaire's daughter?" Malik froze under the flashing lights and pressing microphones. He wanted to run, to vanish, but instead he took a breath and spoke, his voice shaking but clear. "I didn't save a billionaire's daughter," he said. "I helped someone who needed it. That's all. She wasn't a rich girl to me. She was just a person. And no person should ever be left lying alone on the street." The crowd went silent for a moment, stunned by the boy's unpolished but undeniable truth. Then, slowly, cameras lowered. Even reporters couldn't twist dignity into scandal. Richard watched from a distance, arms crossed. For the first time, he didn't see a boy from the shadows. He saw a boy standing taller than most men he had ever met. When Malik returned to the room, Richard stopped him at the door. His voice was quieter now, stripped of its sharpness. "You've given me something I can't repay. Not with money, not with influence. You've reminded me what it means to be human." Malik met his gaze, unafraid. "Then don't repay me. Just remember." The simplicity of the words lingered in the air, more valuable than any empire. Days later, Charlotte was discharged. As she left the hospital, leaning on her father's arm, she turned to Malik once more. "I'll never forget you," she said. Malik smiled faintly, clutching his notebook. "That's enough." Richard extended a hand toward the boy. It was stiff and awkward, but it was a hand nonetheless. Malik hesitated, then shook it, not as a servant to a master, not as a poor boy to a billionaire, but as two human beings standing on equal ground for the first time. And in that simple gesture, something shifted. Malik walked back into the city that had tried to forget him, carrying nothing but his notebook and the quiet pride of knowing that for once his courage had forced the world to see. Richard returned to his towers, his wealth, and his endless responsibilities. But somewhere in the back of his mind, the image of a small black boy kneeling on a street corner lived on, reminding him that power was nothing without dignity. And Charlotte, healed but forever changed, held on to the memory of a voice that had called her back from the edge, not because of who she was, but because she was human. Because in the end, that was enough.